And there we are. Ryan Ray, Chris Fenton, Feeding the Dragon Show, Feeding the Dragon Podcast. Mr. Fenton, it's been a few days since we've done this. News is popping. We were talking offline a few weeks ago, like maybe this China stuff is going to settle down. I don't think that's going to be the case in the near future. How are you doing, sir?
Well, I'm doing well on a bunch of fronts. Okay. Number one is China seems to be front and center. So sorry I'm not dressed up for this podcast, but had a bunch of interviews to do this morning, and I have not had a chance to take a shower yet. So apologies to anybody offended by my look right now. And it is actually a little cold in California, which doesn't happen often. The second thing I want to say is Ryan Ray landed the exclusive interview of the century. Had Ted Cruz on the other day on his other podcast, which, by the way, I think I should be a little offended. Why wasn't he on Feeding the Dragon? But I do know you plugged it to him. So let's see if we can get on there or maybe get on the verdict with him. But post Cancun vacation, very timely, very timely. And by the way, you didn't spend any time on Cancun. I was curious if you're going to ask the question. You spent time on some really smart stuff over 25 minutes. So if people haven't listened to that interview, I highly recommend it. I noticed your following's going up because of it. I'm sure Ted will tweet about it. But, dude, that's a huge get. Also, I turned 50 March 4th, which is next Thursday, I think. Yeah, next Thursday. And I just had my half-century physical, and knock on wood, all good in the hood, which means Feeding the Dragon podcast is going to continue for another 50 years.
There we go.
How many episodes?
I don't know if I'll make another 50, but you'll be around.
No, you'll be there. You'll be there.
Thank you for the kind words. Really quick, I will address the Cancun stuff because some people have asked me about it. So two things. One, I was scheduled to interview him the day he went to Cancun, and they canceled. So that was kind of a weird thing behind the scenes. But two, I didn't want to ask him I saw he'd been asked about that a bunch already, and it seemed kind of pointless to bring that up when they scheduled me for 10 to 15 minutes. That's what they said. And during the interview, they bumped it another 10. And so my thought was either A, I can sit here and try to get him to say sorry for Cancun again, waste time on that, or get into the things. And luckily they gave me an extra 10 minutes because we really didn't even get to a lot of the stuff in the first 10 to 12 minutes. So I'm glad you enjoyed it, folks. Check it out. It's someone sent me a note noting that Ted Cruz at the end said, thank you for talking about the substantive issues. And so I think, for a show like Inside the War Room or whatever, you're not at Fox News, you have to understand your role in life, which is if you want to get these guys on, you need to talk issues with them the best you can. And so, anyways, hope folks enjoy that.
And by the way, I agree. I think there's platforms where somebody should ask him about that. And quite frankly, as somebody who's as seasoned as he is, he probably should just address it right off the bat, get the elephant out of the room anyway. Your format, your platform, and the important stuff you talk about, I can see why he just didn't even get into it. And I totally understand why you didn't ask those questions, because it's in the scheme of things, what we talk about here, who the hell cares about that, right? It was a stupid thing for him to do. The optics were terrible. Like, as a politician, that long serving, you should probably know better, but totally agree with you not asking there. And I thought you asked some really in-depth stuff and got him pretty in deep on a lot of the questions. And I heard some stuff that I hadn't heard him say before. So anyway, I commend you. And that was a huge get. I mean, that's a game changer.
Well, thank you. I do want to ask you real quick. He did say that he thought that the Biden administration was being soft on China, or it looks like they're heading that direction. And my comment to him was, usually when I have guests on, I just kind of let them say what they want to say, and then I might add a small commentary. I'm not there to debate them. But anyways, my comment to him was that I thought Biden has summarized Xi Jinping's motivations and stuff pretty well, and he called him xenophobic. I thought that was a pretty good win. But what did you think about Cruz's assessment that maybe Biden is going to be soft on China? Is that a Republican talking point, or are you kind of seeing maybe there is a pathway where Biden is going to be soft on China?
Look, the jury's really out. I just did the Katz roundtable with John Katzimatis this morning, and he had on Newt Gingrich prior to me, and then Gordon Chang prior to that. And those guys are super hawkish, and Gordon Chang was all over Biden for being super soft on China already. I personally think actions are going to speak louder than words. We're going to have to see. If you look at actions right now and you look at the people that he has advising him on China, once again, I say I'm cautiously optimistic. I mean, I think between the Jake Sullivans and the Eli Ratners and all the other names that we mentioned, on the podcast, that it's very promising. That I think if I'm on a scale of dove to hawkish of about a 6, I would say all his picks are roughly around a 6 too. None of them want war, and none of them want the way things were prior to Trump. So we'll see if their actions lay out where their headspace has been up until this moment. And then I will say, on top of that, the Catherine Tai pick for trade rep, which would be the replacement of Robert Lighthizer. I mean, Robert was super, super hawkish on the trade subject, as we know. I mean, he and Peter Navarro were sort of in the same camp. And then you had Wilbur Ross and Larry Kudlow on another side. Catherine seems to be a lot like Lighthizer. So once again, cautiously optimistic. Actions will speak louder than words. And I probably would have felt even better up until about 15 minutes ago when I saw the news about MBS, the Crown Prince, which you would say Saudi Arabia doesn't have a lot of relevancy to China and the China discussion, but I would argue it definitely does. And you and I were just speaking about it prior. So I'm curious what you think about that and how that ties into China policy.
Absolutely. Before I do that, though, if you are tuning in and you had to hop out on the live stream, be sure to check out the podcast, Apple, Spotify, anywhere you get good podcasts. And also, I want to give a shout out to Dave Snell, who reached out through LinkedIn, connected with me. We've been talking a little bit of China offline, so always feel free to hit up Chris, myself, or whatever at the Dragon Feeder on Twitter, Chris Fenton on LinkedIn, Ryan Ray on LinkedIn, and Ryan Ray Sr. on Twitter. Love to chat offline with folks, so thank you for reaching out.
By the way, Dave, I never asked. Dave's reached out to me as of a lot of others. I'm curious. I didn't ever ask Dave. Is Dave actually the Manchester United Twitter feed, or is that somebody else?
I think that's someone else. I think.
Oh, okay. Well, Manchester United's been excellent too. In regards to
yeah, he's supposed to be on. I think at some point I should probably tweet him and let him know we're going. But yeah, I've seen it. I don't know his name. I've seen a picture of him because he met up with one of my other hosts on another show. Anyways, okay. So on MBS. So first off, when you talk about China and Saudi Arabia and the U.S., oil is the big connector there. China has been buying a prolific amount of oil, especially in 2020 when prices are low. That's what they do. They buy a lot of oil so they can give it back. They can either sell it, put it back on the market, keep prices down, whatever they're going to do. They need cheap oil. It's a good way to do it. So them being tied to Saudi Arabia, there is a connection there that we don't think about day to day. Apart from that, though, to your point about the Khashoggi stuff, releasing it, I thought was kind of a good step. Something Trump wouldn't do. Trump was obviously selling arms to the Saudis for their war in Yemen, and so he wanted to keep that going. And I asked a Saudi expert about it, and they thought that the Saudis would kind of take it okay. They didn't really care, which stunned me because could you imagine if we released a report about Xi Jinping authorizing the execution of someone, he would lose his mind, I would imagine. So that kind of caught me off guard.
Well, look at the reports. Look at BBC or some of the reports on what's happening in Xinjiang province and the reaction from the Chinese. I mean, it's major geopolitical retaliation.
Right. So from that perspective, I was, step in the right direction for the Biden administration. They pulled the weapons arms. Now they're not going to do anything else. And so the question I think was pulling. So you have a couple of things. We have a little airstrike in Syria, but pulling the weapons sales for the war in Yemen, and there's still some other ties there. Was that kind of the preemptive strike? In other words, was it the way to say, you know what, we're going to release this report, and oh, by the way, we're pulling the weapons sales. So maybe the damage has already been done, and there's not really a lot to follow up on. I will say, I'm curious what you think. I do think releasing the report, if we see a pattern of declassifying stuff like this is a good step. I don't know if it's enough or what the proper response should be. You think back to Iran, they shot down a commercial airliner. No one ever talks about that anymore. They killed hundreds of innocent people on a commercial airliner January of last year. No one talks about it. So in the grand scheme of things, I don't know what we're supposed to do or how we're supposed to handle these type of issues.
Yeah, I mean, the New York Times had a breaking news story about the fact that there won't be any repercussions for this report and what they found, and the fact that MBS was deemed guilty of acknowledging and both approving the killing of Khashoggi. It's a weird situation where it seems like a New York Times or the left side of mainstream media seems much more concerned with human rights issues out of Saudi Arabia versus China. And I wonder if that's just because the, capitalistic complex system of the way the United States works and who's essentially beholden to who, creates this sort of, oh, let's not pay a lot of attention to it in China, but let's pay more attention to Saudi Arabia. Because if you think about Saudi Arabia, is much more like oil company focus, energy focus, which tends to be more on the Republican side of the aisle, whereas China seems to be more NBA, Nike, Starbucks, Apple, Hollywood, etc. on the left side of the aisle. It's fascinating how everything seems to be so damn political. And the problem with this politicization of every decision, every way we cover stories and all that stuff is the fact that it's creating hypocrisy, right? Like, and I tie it back to China, this MBS Crown Prince situation, which, by the way, I almost ended up working with the Saudi Arabians on their Hollywood initiatives. If you Google search me, you'll see that. The fact that we're trying to press even the Beijing 2022 Olympics into this idea of trying to address and possibly fix what's happening to the Uyghur population, the ethnicity cleansing in the Xinjiang province, or even some of the stuff that happened in Hong Kong, or issues happening elsewhere and sort of the way they treat labor, et cetera. Those human rights issues are very important issues. But if we're going to press China to try to fix those, or actually pressure China to fix them, or actually take really strong stances against China to fix them, we should probably be doing the same thing with other countries too. And this Saudi Arabia headline is pretty glaringly in your face about the fact that it seems like we have different ground rules for different nations.
Well, I mean, let's just call it the spade here. This goes back to the U.S. In post 9/11 war, a world where, we decided that we were going to attack certain countries and not certain countries, regardless of the origin of the people who attacked our country. And so Saudi Arabia has gotten special privileges, whether you agree or disagree with that. This is a fact from the U.S. government for quite some time. So I don't know. We'll see where it heads. I do think that, to your point about the media, one thing's interesting is the media coverage from the energy standpoint is largely dependent on what the Saudis do. With China, I'm wondering, I thought about this some, because with China, maybe there is some U.S. reporters who have access to Xi Jinping. I doubt it. But, the China coverage is probably a little bit lower ranking officials. And so I wonder if that changes their ability to cover it. Because we covered a story in the War Room a while back about these folks from maybe the Sudan, I can't remember where it was, that were in cage. They were basically in cages in Saudi Arabia. And no one's talking about the story. They just have them there. Ethiopia, I think it was. Anyways, they just have them in this prison, and no one's talking about it. And the Saudis aren't letting them go. It's really kind of that same China mentality of, oh, well, they're there and we're going to help them out. And no one really talks about it. So I think you're right that it does create these hypocrisies that make it hard to address countries universally or unilaterally.
Well, look, it's a really interesting point. And I like to find the silver lining in a lot of these stories. And as I went through the New York Times article and some of the other articles about this MBS decision not to penalize them in any way for the fact that he literally chopped a journalist into pieces, and who knows what happened to those pieces. I think we don't even know with that. But it's a terrible story. But the silver lining in it all was that he never pushed U.S. diplomats to do anal swab testing to see if they had COVID. That, to me, is promising. What do you think, Ryan?
Let me tell you something. I don't know what disease I'd have to be scared of getting to get the anal swab, but it does not exist today.
My question is it a self testing? Is there somebody watching you as you do it, or does somebody come and do it for you? Like, there's something just so awful and weird about it. And I actually know, I am going to email a couple of diplomats tonight that I'm friends with. Actually, one I went to high school with, believe it or not. And I want to ask and see what he actually says. But I mean, I don't even know what to make of that, because there's plenty of tests for COVID out there, right? And we all talked about how some of them are more accurate than others and whatever. If real accuracy is the key, then test them a bunch of different ways and see if they have them. But this anal testing thing and the face loss and the embarrassment and all that kind of stuff, I feel like there's no way it doesn't play into the larger sort of geopolitical issues going on between the two superpowers right now. And there was some sort of practical joke side to this thing, which one side is laughing and the other one's sort of embarrassed about.
Yeah, well, so you brought up the BBC and you brought up kind of these, how do we handle this hypocrisy thing? And you have these diplomatic issues. Well, we talked about the Uyghurs a little bit, but let's kind of go to the story that kind of broke on, I guess it was Monday, Tuesday, which is China offered the UN to come visit and look at what's going on with the Uyghurs in China. And I'm kind of torn on this because will the UN hop on their plane and go tomorrow? Because that's what you have to do, right? You have to you can't get all these plans. You got to get on the plane today and go, because the longer you wait, the more China can move people around and hire stuff. Will China let them in immediately? This was kind of an interesting thing. You talk about, how this chess game is being played is. So what do you think? Do you think the UN will actually try to get down to China really fast and in a hurry to see what's going on? Or is this something 3 months from now we're going to hear about some UN envoy? It's finally making its way down to China. And by that time, China could have moved people around and pay people off or whatever they wanted to do.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, honestly, I almost feel like we should just sort of give up on this whole figuring out. I mean, there's the allowing access to the Xinjiang province, which is one thing, right? And then there's the COVID situation, which is the other. I just feel like, you know what? China's coming out of COVID. They're breaking box office records. They're back to normal. Their economy is killing it. Even if you only believe the numbers are, partially false or fully false, they seem to be somewhat in a better state than we are. We just got to fix our own crap and get done with it and move on. And I don't know if we'll ever find out the origins of this thing. And quite frankly, now we have vaccines and all that kind of stuff. I think we should just deal with it.
No, not for the COVID. They invited the UN to go look at the Uyghur camps.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's both issues I think we're trying to press for, right? But the Uyghur camp thing is a crazy situation too, where I don't think, remember, these are people that can literally build a hospital in 3 days, right? So by the time exactly what you said, the UN says we're coming over, they're going to plan it out. China's going to build something or fix something or move something or whatever it is. Like, we're never going to get to the bottom of it. We have it's not circumstantial. We have good evidence that some terrible stuff is happening there. There's plenty of witnesses. If you're on Clubhouse like 3 weeks ago, you heard firsthand a lot of that stuff. So I don't know. I think we, in a way, they're sort of guilty until proven innocent in this situation. I think we have good reason to make it that way. But we also are being a little hypocritical about it all too, with just this latest Saudi Arabian development. So this has gotten more complicated and less black and white than it should be.
I would just say, I would push back a little bit. I would say if they invite you to come, you go. And you go, you film, you document. And if you go there and it looks like they've manipulated, then you show it. Obviously, we have satellites that can take pictures and see what they're doing. So I think one of the things that when you talk about how China propaganda, one thing that's frustrating is kind of how the U.S. media, and I'm sympathetic to it, it's hard to cover. Like I read a story the other day, it's like the Chinese, the CCP cracked down on this group because they were trying to get rid of corruption. It's like, probably not. The CCP is corrupt, and that's why. And so I think we have to be very careful to not let the propaganda become normal talking points. So if they say come, I think you got to go. And, there's no reason not to go. I'm not saying the COVID stuff, I'm with you. I think we're wasting our time there. I'm not an epidemiologist. I have no idea. Maybe we can determine that. I doubt it. The Uyghur stuff, if they say go, you go. And you go and you take pictures and you talk to people. And then you push them until they say no more. And then you scream, we tried to come and you wouldn't let us. So I think you got to push their hand. This is one of the few times that we can. And then you come back and you play these things. You share it on social media. And then we can go to Nike or whoever and say, listen, so that would be my pushback there.
Look, I think that's a good point. I think you nailed it. I mean, if we can get that kind of access and actually lead the trail towards full proof, that would be fantastic. Because the last thing you want, right? And I think this is apples and oranges, and I don't think it's the same thing. But the last thing you want is sort of a, definite like, oh, we have proof of weapons of mass destruction thing, and then we create a whole war over that nonsense. Like I would love to know for sure. And that's, it goes into like some of the questions I've gotten on some of the harder interviews about like organ harvesting and things like that, where there's a lot of circumstantial evidence that stuff's happening. Of course, I've never seen it firsthand. I haven't really seen it from a news source where I know for sure it's going on. We can pretty nicely suspect that there's something like that happening, but it's still a little weird to say, oh, for sure it's happening and go up on, CBS and talk about it. Like that just doesn't feel right to me until I actually like really feel good that it's there. But I'm with you. I mean, I think if there really is an opportunity to try to lead the horse to water and know for sure it's there, like let's give it a shot.
Agreed. Okay, let's move on. We've talked about this a little bit, but there were some numbers that came out. I'm trying to pull it here over the weekend. Yeah, this is according to the AP. Last year, China sold an estimated 2.7 billion in tickets compared to 2.3 in the U.S., which I'm in the wrong spot of the article. You have it, Chris, the number for me. What was the number for the weekend in the box office? I'm trying to pull it up here. I thought I had it, but I don't.
Well, it's just like, and it still feels really wrong to me. I mean, let's face it. COVID started in China. It spread across the world. Everybody's struggling with it. China has an industry like we do everywhere around the world, which is the Hollywood industry. It's super high profile. It's very visible. Whatever's happening in Hollywood tends to be covered by a lot of news sources. They have these, theaters that are open at 50% or 75%, and they're breaking every record that's ever existed in the box office business. And it's a real in-your-face statistic. And over the Lunar New Year, they made well over $1 billion. In fact, most of February was in 1 week of February, which is where they grossed $1.75 billion, right? $1.75 billion is almost what the whole United States made last year. It's almost what all of China made last year. It's actually, what is that? It's like a fifth or at least 20% of what the greatest box office total we've ever had in the United States was, which is 11 billion. It's a real in-your-face stat that it just feels wrong to me. Like it's crazy to see them so back in action in an industry that we train them from the ground up to create into this world-class scalable type of content business where they can break numbers that the US has never done.
Yeah. So do you, we always have a question on the numbers. How confident are you in these numbers? Are these legit ticket sales, or does the CCP sponsor some of the subsidize some of these theaters, and maybe these numbers are inflated? How do you read this?
Well, these movies are not the propaganda movie. I mean, they all have propaganda in them and get through censorship and all that kind of stuff, but they're not the actual state produced movies like the Founding of the Republic or the Great Revival or those kind of movies where they actually are partially made by the CCP and China Film Group and Ministry of Propaganda to promote whatever message. Like these are made by private companies in China. I'm putting quotation marks for those listening. Those propaganda movies, the real propaganda movies, yes, they totally fictitiously make up ticket sales. They force theaters to hold on to the screens as long as possible for those movies. They shut out a lot of the competition. They really tilt the playing field for them. These movies, not really as much. And you can never really believe numbers out of China to an extent, but they're pretty realistic here. One of the places where we did find fudging of numbers was in particular with Hollywood films and how they performed in that market. Because for a while, Hollywood movies did well over 50% of the market share. And there was a period of time where the Chinese government was trying to abate the amount of market share Hollywood had to below 50%, right? And one of the things they did was they would put an extra tax on theaters that were contributing more than 51% of their revenues to Hollywood films, right? To essentially help them like put bigger screens with the Chinese films and hold those screens longer, all that kind of stuff. And what Hollywood studios were finding is that even with the theaters doing that kind of stuff, the Hollywood movies were still overperforming. And in order to keep it under 50%, there was ticket skimming from the Hollywood movies and putting them into the local movies. So the Hollywood movies were essentially showing less money made, even though they were selling more tickets.
Okay. Yeah, I can buy that. Okay, let's get to a couple more quick stories here. One, the Olympic story is catching steam. I think you noted that there was an announcement before we got on here that someone was saying that we haven't made an official decision. Now, that could just be posturing. Maybe it hadn't been time, but there is more senators, more congressmen talking about maybe we shouldn't go to the Olympics in 2022. I mean, is this really getting steam, or is this just politicians being opportunistic to get their messaging out there?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I mean, the Saudi Arabian thing, once again, not to bring it up and beat a dead horse, but it still confuses me a little bit. I don't know how politicized this push to boycott is and how much bite is behind the bark. I mean, we saw Senator Rick Scott come out and say that we should boycott. And then there was this weird official government stance article from Reuters, I guess, where the U.S. government still hasn't decided one way or another, which I wasn't aware we actually officially were debating it in whatever context that is. So that was interesting to me. I don't know how this is going to play out, but I really do think we're going to have to, if we are going to threaten the boycott, we should use all the leverage that will create to actually get something accomplished, right? And it shouldn't be some ridiculously difficult challenge to fix. Like, you got to release all the Uyghurs. Right. You got to let them go back to their farms. You got to let them learn their own language and study their own religion. Like, that's what you got to do. No, let's work on basic stuff like WTO designation. You're now a developed country. Standard accounting practices, SEC. Every individual industry like Hollywood, hey, same revenue share as the rest of the world, no quotas or less tariffs or protectionist policies, and apply that to, the other industries that are fighting all the other things like forced tech transfers, the JVs, like all that stuff. And then also the freedom of speech issues we talked about. Like, there's a lot of baby steps that we can accomplish that are practical, reliable, and then we can worry about the tougher stuff down the road. But let's accomplish a couple of things first.
What's interesting about the story is we've talked about it. Who I haven't heard talk about it? China. They haven't, to my knowledge, they haven't said anything about the rumblings that are out there. Have you heard anybody from the Chinese side talk about, how dare you or being insulted? I haven't heard anything from the China side on this issue, which is kind of interesting because they're hearing it.
Yeah, I think. I mean, no one knows what's inside the mind of the CCP, but I did think that weird article, which, by the way, it is unbelievable how there's no media attention on the fact that China has finally said they're going to put the NBA back on broadcast networks. I don't know why that is. I'm confused by that, but oh, well, you could. So anyway, that's a weird one. But the way that whole article was and the way it was tweeted out by the Global Times, it almost felt like a little bit of a warning shot to everybody about Beijing 2022 and the fact that they can do this stuff for 18 months against the biggest league in the world when it comes to China. It felt like one of those like weird, ambiguous threats, which is very Chinese.
Yeah, I think if you're ESPN, if you're Disney, the last thing you want is people talking about China. So if you make a big hoopla about we're back on Chinese TV, then those questions, Daryl Morey, what do we do? Stay with Hong Kong. What do your players think about this issue? So the best thing to do is to not talk about it, and then it kind of goes under the radar. Because if ESPN made a big deal or the NBA made a big deal about going back on Chinese TV, they will get asked questions, and as soon as you get asked questions, you're going to say the wrong thing because you can't say the right thing unless you all stick to your speech. So I think that's why they're avoiding it.
Well, to me, that says how broken our journalistic, freedom of the press system is right now. I mean, it's terrible because that is a big story that people should know about. You don't have to go critical on anybody, but I think it's something that everybody should be aware of, and everybody should be aware that the NBA was punished for 18 months over this thing, and we should talk about that. Like, that's the part that's nuts, right? I mean, the ownership of all these different platforms and who they're beholden to and stuff has really clouded the fact that we can't really understand all the news that we need to know. And I guess that's something that we're supposed to be doing on this platform. But it just is concerning to me.
When you require access to be a media company, and so like ESPN, they need access to the players. And so I don't know if the NBA made the phone call, but ESPN's owned by Disney. So it's quite, your connection's pretty clear there. You look at like maybe Yahoo Sports or Bleacher Report. I don't know who owns all those entities, but you've pointed out multiple times on this podcast on the entertainment side, well, these guys are owned by these guys, and these guys are owned by these guys. And next thing you know, it's like, oh, okay, well, this is the direct link on why the pressure's coming down. So it's not a far stretch to think that the NBA got the word out. Listen, don't talk about this. If you do, you want those interviews, sorry, we're gonna make that a little bit tougher for you. And for these NBA reporters, most of them thrive off of having interviews with players and stuff like that. So that's why independent media is like this show or other shows will cover things that the mainstream refuses to cover, because we don't need interviews with LeBron James to keep going.
Yeah, that's true. And then we just get banned from everything else, and we just have to build it up ourselves, right? But no, I mean, I don't understand, like, how about Fox News? Why not? I mean, Tucker Carlson could bring it up. Why can't the New York Times talk about it? I mean, the NBA is not going to shut New York Times sports journalists out of the locker room. I mean, that's just too big a platform for them to shut out. So why can't somebody not in the sports division of New York Times actually talk about something that's sort of geopolitical in influence and put some attention on it? But anyway, I don't want to beat a dead horse here either. I mean, it's a crazy thing. And by the way, all this conversation too, another thing that I wanted to bring up that we're reading a lot of reports about, and I actually retweeted Isaac Stonefish this morning about another report that he had seen, but this xenophobia against Asians or Chinese people. I mean, the fact that, first of all Asians aren't Chinese, and just because somebody maybe looks Chinese doesn't mean they are Chinese. And quite frankly, that doesn't matter. I mean, what we're talking about is tough and fair in regards to how we need to address China moving forward as the United States of America. But all of this sort of falls on the leadership of China, which is mainly the Chinese Communist Party. Though that is the entity that we have an issue with. We don't have an issue with the individual Chinese people. And we definitely don't have an issue with the Chinese people living here in the United States or elsewhere. I still have lots of friends that are Chinese, a lot of friends that are Chinese in China. That is not where we should be taking out our frustration and anger on. And some of this harassment or some of these physical altercations that are occurring with Asian people here in the United States of America has got to stop.
Yeah, well, it's funny you said that, because I didn't see that tweet until today, but yesterday's newsletter, this is how I opened it up. Depending on where you hear me speak, you might be confused about my stance on China. I love China. I love the Chinese people. What I don't like has mainly to do with what their government does, which makes it hard at times to just chat about China. And then I go on and talk about my guest. And you're right, because if you're hearing someone, and listen, there's some hawkish folks who I really wonder what their motivations are. They're talking about bombing folks to death. I'm kind of concerned, but I think it's hard, because even when you talk about the CCP, it's not, there's 100 million members of the CCP. So it's not even all of the CCP that we're referring to, because there's plenty of CCP members who could care less. They're just trying to make it from paycheck to paycheck. It's really a certain small percentage of the CCP that you're referring to. And you have to kind of remind yourself of that, because you can't stop every 3 seconds. Okay, Xi Jinping and his cronies we're talking about here, or these guys there. You kind of have to speak loosely so you can have conversation. But for myself and yourself and for the listeners, you have to remember that ultimately we're talking about the ones who are pulling the strings is who we're really being critical of. Now, there are some average citizens who obviously are going along with that, but then you get into some weird stuff about propaganda and where they understand, and you get into some kind of stuff. So yes, I agree. And the ones that are over here, I think that if you're listen, I'm a libertarian. I believe in the non-aggression principle. So if you're aggressing on someone for no good reason, then we've got a problem to begin with, whether they're Asian or African American or white or black or whatever.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. So once again, like, treat people the way you want to be treated. That's pretty much I think I learned that in kindergarten, as did a lot of us. So let's just apply that moving forward. Now, if it's a CCP official that you see actually carrying out an atrocity against a Uyghur, that's a different story. Okay. Let's move on because we're running out of time. A couple other things that I thought were interesting. Just an amazing stat this week that came out. E-com in the retail business in China hit almost 56%. Of retail is done on e-com sites in China. That's unbelievable. If anybody's wondering what it is or what it was last year in the US, which, by the way, was completely amplified by COVID, it was 16%. Okay. That's a crazy, crazy number. Another thing, too, is ByteDance and TikTok. The TikTok issue, which we brought up, wondering, hey, why every once in a while TikTok is a tree falling in the woods that everybody's watching, and then why is it a tree falling in the woods that no one hears? Well, it came back alive again, and ByteDance is paying a whopping $92 million in fines for the privacy issues, which translated in ByteDance terms is the equivalent of, I think, about 3 or 4 pennies for one of us. Okay. Don't think TikTok and ByteDance is going to get addressed anytime soon in regards to the big data security issues that face our nation there. And that's unfortunate.
Yeah, it's funny. That's just kind of gone away, right? We don't talk about it anymore. And just listen, let me just put this out there. For folks who are wanting to find someone $92 million, just take 10% of that, donate to Feed the Dragon podcast. We could get a little production studio. We could get a producer too, have some guests on. So, listen, 10% of 92 million, that's chump change for whoever's getting it. So we'll take $9.2 million and spend it very, very wisely. So, but yeah.
Good idea. Oh, and one other stat I'll bring up before we end for the weekend. There is a lot of talk, and it came up in CNBC, that China is going to double its economy, the size of its economy. And how long? 100 years? 50 years? No, how about 14 years? 2035. Now, I will say what's interesting about China is they do throw out these crazy projections of where they're going and what happens. Mysteriously, whether they fudge the numbers or not, they tend to hit those. That's the crazy part. I mean, a lot of the stats that they talked about in the Hollywood film business, they all hit. Now, whether they sort of reverse engineer it so that it happens or not, I don't know. But that's a crazy, crazy sort of projection that was put out there. 14 years from now, doubling the size of that economy. And that economy, as we know, is very large.
It is very large. And it's one of those things when you look at the GDP growth of China or their economy size, you have to be careful. There's so many people, and for so long they had double-digit growth. Well, it's because their economy is so small. And so when you talk about doubling it now, you're getting into a different territory, except for the fact they have 1.34 billion people, and so their economic growth is interesting. I'll just throw this out there. I'm very skeptical of that for a couple of reasons. One, if you look at all the money that they owe, that is owed to them through Belt and Road initiatives, they have to collect that. On top of that, you look at energy prices. We don't talk about that on the show, but they have to have low cost energy, whether that's oil, whether that's solar, wind, coal. So they're dependent on a lot of things. With that being said, if those things happen, because their per capita income is so low for the middle class, sliding that up a little bit creates huge economic growth. So we'll see. But if they can pull it off, it'd be impressive to watch. And we'll be here 14 years from today, breaking it down and what we think about it.
For sure. I'll be 63, almost 64 by then. Oh my God.
We'll be the Tom Brady of podcasting.
Oh yeah, the Tom Brady of podcasting. Exactly. We'll have episode 7,000 under our belts by then.
There you go. Okay, Chris, I think that is it for today. Again, if you missed any of the show, it's on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, anywhere you can get podcasts. You should be able to get the show. At the Dragon Feeder on Twitter for Chris, at Ryan Ray Sr. for me, or LinkedIn, or wherever you can find us at. Be happy to chat offline with anyone. Anything else, Chris, before we get out of here today?
No, that's it. Everybody have a great weekend, and maybe let's hope for a zero news weekend when it comes to the U.S.-China talk and the tension, and we can actually rest away from social media and everything else. But I have a feeling that's not going to happen, so stay tuned for the next episode.
All right, and we'll be back next week.